Hello my dear friends, how is it going? I'm Härger and today I'm here to try to briefly express some points concerning differences between indigenous and native, how and when to use them, towards whom each term is applicable, and some other things to be taken into consideration. It's not like I come here totally unprepared, however, I do want to express a few points, see where this can land, and hopefully create here a discussion with all of you. I know I have quite a few indigenous people watching my videos, some of whom I have maintained conversations with, so please, from your own experience and perspective, do express your thoughts and how this should all be addressed, and by all means, correct me if I'm wrong, please. I'm here to express some ideas as much as I am here to also learn from you and the things you wish to express in the comments. And yes, I know, a white European man is hardly the best voice to talk about indigenous issues. However, I do think such subjects should be discussed more often, which is why I invite you all to express your views so we can all learn from each other and construct far better and appropriate approaches to these subjects in order to be more educated on these matters. So, I am doing this video also because on a more recent video I've done, I've made this statement. The Sami are the last indigenous people in Europe. And it seems some people were quite confused, and in a way, I do understand the confusion. Some people were saying that I'm wrong because the Sami are not the last indigenous people in Europe, as people born in Europe are all indigenous. And here, people are making a confusion between native and indigenous. And we shall get to that. Other people went further by saying that my statement is very dangerous because I'm affirming that Europeans are not native to anywhere. To which I respond, what in the name of holy fuck are you talking about? We have been living in a strange and dangerous moment of human social interactions where on one side we seem to have a lot of people who get offended by everything, and on the other hand, or on the other side, people who assume there are enemies everywhere and everything being said is a personal attack. This is a problem, and this is what happens when people are not listening to what is being told and are just looking for something to be offended by or to come to the rescue and play the righteous warrior in defense of an imaginary attack. Listen to what is being told. I said, the Sami are the last indigenous people in Europe. Indigenous, not native. So I beg you, for goodness sake, to listen to this entire video as I try to express some points here. The Sami are the only remaining indigenous people in Europe. Indigenous isn't the same as native. Many ethnic groups that are in the same area for hundreds of thousands of years were indigenous once, but not anymore, but are native there. Some indigenous people can be nomadic and not native to places that they can inhabit for a while, for a time, but remain indigenous nonetheless. Being indigenous has to do with the way of living, belief systems, and an entire culture tied to land. Not only it is a perspective on life and the way of life, but also behavioral patterns towards land and its persons, which we shall get to it further ahead. And everyone, absolutely everyone, is native to somewhere, but not all people are indigenous. As a matter of fact, people can stop being indigenous, and it is easier for an indigenous person to become non-indigenous than it is for a non-indigenous to become indigenous. But we shall get to that as well further ahead. And I know native and indigenous are often used as synonyms, but it is far more complicated than that. A Norwegian is native to Scandinavia, but not indigenous. A Sami is native to Scandinavia and indigenous. I'm a native European, but I do not have an indigenous way of life. Most of us live within systems that are not indigenous, which have progressively turned us into non-indigenous people. We are all native to some place, but not all of us are indigenous anymore. Sami, Inuit, First Nations, Native Americans, Australia Aboriginals, etc. are indigenous. If your argument is to say that indigenous and native are the same thing, your social and communication skills are far worse than mine. There are two important points to take into consideration here. Just because a dictionary says that indigenous and native can be used as synonyms, we are not artificial intelligence that learns from fixed information that presents part of human communication. We are human beings. As such, we learn from interaction. Every linguist knows that language is flexible and fluid. A word, a term, can have particular agreed upon meanings and designations. However, it can totally change its meanings to other different meanings in context. Indigenous and native can be used as synonyms. However, in particular contexts of dealing with the diversity of human populations, communities, and ethnic groups, some terms are better than others and convey particularly important meanings. A dictionary is something fixed for a time. However, it is not for the sake of annoying everybody that dictionaries are rewritten every year with new meanings, new words, and new ways to apply words and terms, because language is a mechanism of communication. It's flexible, fluid, and it is adaptable to every situation, new social, cultural, religious, and political ideologies and expressions, to new ways of thinking and social psychological modes of communication. We are always developing the more we interact with people and learn from their behaviors, cultures, worldviews, and the effort to interact with them, include them, and create relationships with them. Another point is that, as much as this seems to be common sense, I think people forget that we are using the English language here to facilitate communication and understanding with a variety of people. And we may use indigenous and native as synonyms as well, but we also apply those terms in different contexts to mean different things, and we use the English terms and words and denominations to facilitate understanding between people. If a person doesn't understand that indigenous and native can be used to express different things, not only they probably don't know any language other than English, but they have also barely mastered the English language itself. Stating that I am wrong in saying that the Sami are the last indigenous people in Europe, and that by saying that I'm affirming that Europeans are not native to anywhere, based solely on the confusion between indigenous and native because the dictionary says are synonyms, it's utter fucking dull on the part of such people that present that argument. Let's start with native. Absolutely everyone on this floating rock we call Earth is a native. Everyone is born somewhere on the planet and they are native to that place where they have been born. To put things in a simpler perspective, we are native to wherever our mother's vulva was at by the time we got out from it. Nativeness can also be a cultural and political construct because determining if a person is native to somewhere can vary quite a lot in perspective depending on how a country or nation deals and perceives and judges nativeness. If we look into Europe nowadays, in our current time, because that's where we are at right now, say a couple that comes from Syria into Belgium, and this is a random example, don't take shit in your head, the couple who was born in Syria, they are native to Syria. However, if they have a child in Belgium, the baby is literally born in Belgian ground, the child is seen as native to Belgium. The child's parents are native to Syria, the child is native to Belgium with Syrian ancestry. However, this is not the standard global view. Other countries, other nations view nativeness in a different way. Some countries like to complicate things quite a lot and only assume or agree someone whose ancestors have come from somewhere else is only native to a place according to a number of generations that have been born in that place, even though a first generation of people born in a different place than that of their parents and have never actually seen or have been into their parents' homeland and was born on this new place, even so they may not be considered native, and only 3 to 9 generations ahead are finally considered native, even if the previous generations before have also been born into that place. Some countries and nations see nativeness differently. Be that as it may, everyone is native to some place. As such, Europeans are very much native to some place in Eurasia. And this could open up another completely different discussion, because a European is not an ethnic group. A European is a cultural, political, historical, and geographical construct that encompasses several different peoples and ethnic groups of a cultural, political, historical, and geographical area. Some would even argue that Europe is not a continent, but in fact a political and geographical construction, and that the continent itself is Eurasia. Anyway, let's take my example. I am native to Portugal. I was born in Portugal. So were some of my closest living relatives and some more recent dead ones as well. I'm a European citizen as well. I'm within this cultural and political and historical construction called Europe, within the Eurasian landmass. According to my DNA analysis, 2 analyses actually, if we divide Europe in half, I'm totally Western European, Western half of Europe in my ancestry. Mainly my ancestors come from Portugal, let's say the extreme west of the Iberian Peninsula along the Atlantic. They come from the British Isles and from Scandinavia. Other smaller percentages are all scattered throughout the western half of Europe: Spain, France, Germany, and Switzerland. My ancestors haven't moved much from the same place, which kind of explains my introvert character. My ancestors were native to Europe. Now, which one of them were indigenous? Now, that depends on how far one can trace ancestry based on haplotypes, genes, whatever, to determine the history of a people of a far distant past from an area with whom we share our ancestry with. For instance, in the geographic area where it is Portugal, going further back in history through archaeology to determine the lifestyle and belief systems of a people that lived in that area with whom I share ancestry with, I would say my ancestors on that part were lost indigenous in the pre-Roman Iron Age, not based on nativeness, but based on a set of cultural and religious factors, as well as customs, worldviews, belief systems, and their expressions and behavioral patterns towards life and the world and how their society was built. Which is pretty hard to determine when it comes to human communities of a distant past that have been long dead. Indigenousness is easier to determine when it comes to living human communities who have still kept their indigenousness. I don't even know if indigenousness is a word, but you understand. And that shows precisely how flexible language can be and how it changes in order to create understanding through communication. Now, in terms of being native to a place, let me give you the example of Native Americans not only because they can also use the term native, although it is falling into disuse, but also because more than 50% of my audience is from the US, and perhaps this will better express the point if it's something they are more familiar with, hopefully. Indigenous peoples and people of indigenous descent are often called First Nation Native Americans. They are native to that land, but they are First Nation because other nations have come after. This may create a little bit of confusion due to the perspectives on nativeness from the part of the populations within the US. At what point do people become native to the US? Colonizers and the enslaved people they have brought were not native to that land. However, their descendants born in that land start to be native there. At what point are people considered native in the US? Will white and black and Latin Americans be forever non-native despite having been born in that geographic area for the past 500 years? How about more recent immigrants? The 19th century and the first half of the 20th century in US history is marked by a great flow of European immigrants. The immigrants themselves are not native to North America, but their children born in that geographic area are native in there. Or are they not? Sorry. When do they become natives? At the third generation, at the fourth, the fifth? Never. It depends on the ideological and political constructions of nativeness for the case of the US. Be that as it may, North American indigenous populations recognize that people born in there are eventually native to the land. As such indigenous populations are often called First Nation, as they were there first. Terms such as American Indian or just Indian, Native American, Indigenous or just Native have been used quite often in different contexts, different dialogues, and different moments in history. All terms are acceptable under certain circumstances and contexts. But to make things easier, it's just a question of being polite and actually ask people what they want to be called, how they want to be addressed. The great majority of indigenous people in North America prefer to be called by their specific tribal name or their designation of ethnicity or their designation of community, people, group, nation, etc. In this way, indigenous and native are not even used. In the US, Native American has been one of the terms widely used, but it has been progressively falling into disuse, not only due to the question of perception of nativeness and when someone can be considered a native according to the ever-changing political and cultural ideologies, but also because the more there is interaction between different ethnic groups and they enter the important political, cultural, and social discussions that encompass the land in which they live on and share with others, the more they express their own perspectives and designations. And when relationships of mutual understanding and respect are created, people start to address one another by the terms they want to be addressed by. And the native in relation to indigenous peoples is falling into disuse. Indigenous peoples often have individual preferences on how they would like to be addressed. In fact, I should also say that native peoples have individual preferences on how they would like to be addressed because we are all native to some place. Indigenous and non-indigenous peoples have their own individual preferences on how they want to be addressed. However, we should be especially careful to avoid assuming how indigenous peoples want to be addressed because there has been several terms to address them that are highly derogatory. Not all indigenous and Indian populations like to be addressed as such, neither that nor as native. Looking at Canada, we could say that First Nation peoples consist mainly of Indians, Métis, and Inuit people. Not all of them like to be called indigenous and or native, and Indian has often been replaced by First Nation. And as a whole, they prefer Aboriginal. Which actually reminds me that Aboriginal populations in Australia never liked to be called native by colonizers and descendants of colonizers, as it would put them under the perspective of being equated with the wildlife, the fauna and flora, under the colonizer perspective. As a whole, they prefer Aboriginal designation, and some prefer Indigenous and not native. Again, nativeness is something we all have. Indigenousness, on the other hand, is something at the moment, as of this video, not all of us have. Indigenousness can be lost or taken away, but nativeness is permanent for as long as you are a human person being born in wherever you are native to that place. And how can indigenousness be lost and or taken away? We have seen it through colonizing efforts. The first approach, other than mass genocide, is to rob people of their own language and force the language of the colonizer. By doing so, people lose several forms of communication and characterization of things that is part of their understanding of the world and how they approach and behave towards the world, the land, and its persons. Adopting a different language is adopting an entire system of communication that has been built through a specific worldview. Language expresses the thoughts of a people that are formed by their own experience according to the social group or environment they live in. From the moment certain terms and ways of addressing persons and life and land are lost and replaced by different ways of addressing and understanding things, people lose knowledge and understanding of their own people and culture. Therefore, they lose identity. Furthermore, acts of assimilation, aside from prohibition of speaking their own language, such as denying people's traditional customs and costumes, as well as music instruments, dance, singing, traditional songs, mythologies, legends, stories, and other social cultural factors, further contributes to destroying the identity of a people. As such, indigenous people can very well stop being indigenous when they are assimilated into a non-indigenous culture and way of life and society. Indigenousness can be taken away in a matter of a century. Now, a person going back to be indigenous, that can take hundreds, if not thousands of years, because not only we have to deconstruct a whole system rooted in our consciousness, but we also have to learn and relearn an entire worldview and way of life. This leads me to another important point on how people can lose indigenousness, which is through civilization. Now, don't take this out of context, because this is not saying that indigenous people are not civilized, they are a bunch of savages. It's not that at all. This is a question of being inserted into a civilizational society. As I've stated on the previous video, animism is inherently indigenous. Animism is an important factor on an indigenous society, community, or group of persons. Surely, we could argue that animism is found in all religions, but neither does that make the religion an animism, nor does it make the people that follow that religion animists. We can find animism in Christianity, yet Christianity is not an animistic religion, nor are Christians animists, nor do they live in an indigenous society, unless, of course, we are talking about indigenous people who have been forced to convert to Christianity and somehow have struggled to maintain their indigenousness, and to their belief systems elements of Christianity have been incorporated. either by force, time, or interaction. Buddhism has plenty of traces of animism, yet it is not an animistic religion. As stated here before many times, animism is a world-accepting perspective or view, while religions such as Christianity and Buddhism and Islam and so on and so forth, they are mainly world-denying views, further enhancing perspectives of a spiritual life completely away from the world in an effort to achieve something spiritually fulfilling on a post-death reality out of this world. But let's not drift away from the main subject. The point is, the more a community of human persons walks towards an indigenous way of life, the better it will understand animism. The more we advance towards a civilizational environment, the more we lose an animistic perception of the world or of life. Let me give you a quick example concerning some African cultures, especially of Central and Southern African cultures, which in their history have been going back and forth in and out of an indigenous society and a civilizational society. And between one and the other, there's a lot of differences in their perceptions of the world and their behaviors towards such perceptions. Take the example of Zimbabwe. During the 11th century, which marks Zimbabwe's Iron Age, there was an impressive civilizational development, reaching its peak in the 14th century of the Common Era. At this period, the people within this civilization were native to Zimbabwe, but they were not indigenous. A civilization is a fixed organism of a human society. A civilization is where humans are permanently sedentary. A civilization is an organizational mechanism that builds cities and confines people to an urban planning in which specific rules and laws are specifically created not only to fix people in an economic organism of production within the system, but also to control the behavior and the life of people in order to maintain them sedentary and producing for the system in a perpetual effort to maintain the well-being of the civilization rather than efforts towards the well-being of the individual and the community. Zimbabwe, between the 11th century and the 15th century of the Common Era, lived in a civilization, with its peak during the early 14th century, as I've said, which then, after this period, it progressively walked out of this civilizational system when it collapsed. During this period, they did not live within an indigenous culture. They had lost indigenousness. They lived in a civilizational society, which is a society that not only is sedentary, we could argue that some indigenous societies are or were or are sedentary, but it also builds cities, it builds a complex urban planning aimed at the perpetual circulation of persons and goods within the system, consumes every resource within and without to the point of exhaustion and eventual collapse. A civilizational society is a society of extreme exploitation of resources and massive consumerism, building networks that further establishes enslavement of species as well as destruction of natural habitat to feed the civilizational system. It's a machine. Civilizational societies can never be indigenous for as long as they are civilizational societies. And indigenous society, on the other hand, can be sedentary, can be a pastoral agricultural society, but doesn't build cities, doesn't exploit land, animals, persons, and resources to utter extinction and collapse of the natural balance, preserves fauna and flora by carefully taking what is needed for the community, building relationships of respect with land and its persons for mutual benefit. An indigenous society can be also semi-nomadic, can be a mobile community, either permanently or seasonal, but never building cities and complex urbanizations and networks of exploitation of resources and species. Given this example, look at the past history of several indigenous societies nowadays, they are indigenous nowadays, which were not indigenous when they were a civilizational society. And look at us, of the so-called Western societies, which we very much live within a civilizational society, not an indigenous one. Which is why I have said the more a community of human persons walks towards an indigenous way of life, the better it will understand animism. The more we advance towards a civilizational environment or society, the more we lose an animistic perception of the world. Sorry again. Animism is inherently indigenous, and it is the core of the behavior that leads to respecting the living world, the land and its persons, whilst a civilizational society consumes itself and everything around it under relationships of servitude and slavery. Given this, perhaps now you can better understand why I said the Sami are the last indigenous people in Europe. Look around you. The ones that are indigenous are the ones that do not live in a civilizational society. The Sami way of life for some is still semi-nomadic and to others can be sedentary, but their entire way of life is built around respecting the land and its persons and consuming what is necessary and building a whole system of beliefs that reflects the need to have respectful interactions with the living world and its persons, as well as belief systems that further enhance the necessity to be respectful towards natural environment, to avoid or at the very least mitigate the more harmful aspects of nature when the balance of cyclical changes isn't respected. A civilizational society is a mechanism of perpetual growth to the point of exhaustion and collapse. An indigenous society is an organic set of interactions, behaviors and relationships that flow with the cycles of nature. If a civilizational society stops working, the entire machine collapses. An indigenous society doesn't have to be worried about stopping its system, because in itself is an adaptable system to the cyclical changes of the natural world. However, if an indigenous society stops existing and is replaced by a civilizational society, the land upon which the civilizational society is built on starts to collapse. Being indigenous is living a land-based life of sustainability without the civilizational mechanisms and retaining ancestral knowledge in living memory passed down through the generations that holds the importance of respecting the living world and living a sustainable existence and keep on applying it to improve present and future circumstances. So yeah, the Sami are very much the last indigenous people in Europe. I'm native to Europe, but I'm not indigenous. The Sami are native to Europe and they are indigenous. In order to return being indigenous, one of the very first efforts is living sustainably and progressively abandon the mechanics of a civilizational society until we do not need to worry anymore about stop working because the system might collapse and we all die. I do hope, very much hope, this video helped. I do hope it was useful, and I apologize if I have unintentionally offended anyone or if I have incorrectly used the terms towards indigenous people. Let me know your thoughts on this, and please share your insights, your knowledge, your experience, everything you want to share. And, sorry. On this matter, please, indigenous people, actual indigenous people, do express yourself, as it will certainly be very useful for us all. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video. And as always, thank you for today. Until we meet again, my dear friends.